Hi, everyone. Thank you so much today for coming to our talk. We are here today to tell you a little bit more about Forza Motorsport and our accessibility journey, doing a little bit of a deep dive into the blind driving assists. Today, you are going to be hearing from a few different individuals, myself, Katrin Hillman, and Todd Helsley. With that, I'm going to drive it back to the very beginning about sort of where we got some of our inspiration from and what sort of helped jumpstart our accessibility process. Several years ago, Turn 10 did an inclusive design sprint or workshop partnering with the Xbox user research team. This opportunity invited several gamers and players who are familiar with Forza Motorsport to come share their insights and experiences on the game and how they interacted with it. Some of these individuals came from very different backgrounds, and we learned a lot from their stories. This workshop was hosted in sort of a workout and breakout session kind of room, where a few of us at a time would meet with these individuals, interview them, ask them questions, and hear about the things that worked for them, some of their challenges, pain points, and the things they enjoyed about the game. We were able to hear from individuals who were part of the military and had low mobility in their hands. We also met a man who used Forza Motorsport as a pain management technique. And so hearing all these stories and experiences really helped sort of kickstart and plant a seed in our minds for what turned out to be some of our accessibility features down the line. You can see some images here about some prototypes and things that we were concepting, but this really helped sort of put us in the right mindset to creating a more approachable and inclusive game. With that, we had a group of individuals get together to think about some areas of focus for our title. We knew we couldn't do everything all at once, but we could focus on a few key accessibility pillars. And so we wanted to distill that down into a couple different areas. And we decided to focus on low vision, blind, and low mobility players and giving them an opportunity to play Forza in a way that they haven't been able to before. We came up with a user story, and this user story is one that we continued to look back onto through our design decisions, our game priorities and features to make sure that we could still hit the goals of this. So that user story is, as a player who has low vision, is blind, or requires minimal input, from startup, I can navigate and race in Forza Motorsport's core game loops unassisted by others, meaning that everything you want to do, you can do in-game. So the team structure that we ended up using to make sure this happened, and this team structure changed quite a lot from the very beginning of the project to where we are today. But this is what ended up working for us. We had an accessibility team, which is actually a smaller team led by myself and Katrin, and a couple of other engineers and test leads and design partners to sort of help oversee the accessibility features that we were working on for the game. That doesn't mean that we did all of them collectively just within that team, but it helped give sort of an engineering and production sort of ownership and accountability for the things that we wanted to do. That accessibility team partnered very closely with the audio team, which you'll see some representatives here from a little bit later in today's presentation, as well as the UI team. The audio team was the brainchild of our blind driving assist feature and really helped harness all the amazing things that came out of that. And our UI team was primarily responsible for all of our visual accessibility features that you can see in the game, such as colorblind filters, text scaling, subtitling, and other things that you see there. We had two leadership team structures that partnered with these teams as well. One called the ALT, or the Accessibility Leadership Team, which was comprised of champions and stakeholders from across the studio that were incredibly passionate about wanting to bring the best accessibility that we could to our game. That team also partnered with what we call FAST, our Forza Accessibility Support Team, pun intended, which also had people that were interested in accessibility and wanted to learn more and learn how to be better designers, engineers, producers, etc., across the studio. And that group met monthly alongside some of these other teams. So that's just a little bit of context into our journey so far. So we set out to try and make the most accessible Forza Motorsport ever. I'm going to pass it on to Katrin to talk a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Neha. As Neha said, we were setting out to make the most accessible Forza Motorsport ever. And to do that, first we needed to figure out, where did we start? What's our baseline? And in Forza Motorsport 7, it was the first game in our franchise that had text to speech and speech to text. It had basic subtitles you could turn on. You could customize the difficulty of the drivatars. It had some level of customization for car controls, a little bit more so on PC than on console. It had granular audio volume sliders, and we've had car control assist since the Xbox 360 era. And so that was our baseline. And so where are we going to go from there? So I'm breaking our features down into a few different areas here. This first section is really applicable to any type of game, and it's mostly about UI. So important things for UI, especially for low vision players, is color and contrast. And so we have various settings that enable colorblind modes for the UI, which does palette swaps, and higher contrast, which we broke out separately for the UI and the in-game HUD. We have settings that let you turn off moving backgrounds behind text, which is an important cognitive accessibility setting. And of course, we also have, for text readability, we have text scaling, which we again did separately for the HUD versus the UI. So you can turn on large fonts. And you can see in this screenshot here that all of these settings are on, and the text is at its largest size. And in addition to that, for blind players, it's important to, that of course they can, hear what's going on screen. So we put a lot of work into our screen narrator. Also because it's not just blind players that use screen narration. Sometimes we've had people with small children who don't read very well yet will turn on screen narration because they can understand the spoken language. This also could happen for people learning a foreign language, or, of course, for people who are low vision or blind. And finally, for our low mobility pillar, and also for the Microsoft accessibility standards, it was important for us to make sure that our entire UI was navigable with only a single digital input at a time. So no fine-grained smooth motions, no analog controls, and no button combinations. We even did this for mouse input by making our button bar at the bottom of each screen clickable. So, and making sure that there was the go back button was always in the button bar, which means that keyboard and mouse players wouldn't have to reach a second hand or keep moving their hand over to the escape key to go back. So beyond that, we get into our game-specific features that players can configure to customize the game to their liking. The most obvious of these, of course, is blind driving assist, but you'll hear more about that from Todd in just a moment. Another cool one that our audio team added was audio descriptions, and these are dynamic. So various cutscenes in the game, such as entering track, going into the pits, leaving the pits, the intro cinematic, these sorts of things, will all have audio descriptions. And for the ones that happen live on track, these audio descriptions will give you information about the dynamic weather that is present for your current event. So here you see a screenshot of a nice, rain slick track. That a sighted player can think, oh, great, this, the road will be slippery today. But for a blind player, they will hear the audio description that says rain showers leave the track slick, which even has its own subtitle presented here in high contrast. So another feature that we were really happy to put in for Forza Motorsport is what we called one-touch driving. And really, this is because, according to the player feedback we've received from Forza Motorsport 7, it was very close to being drivable and playable with a single input. And so we thought, why not go all the way? So we added a throttle assist. We added a pit entry assist as a way for players to get into the pit with just a single button press at any point during their lap. We added an easy way to reset to track, which is something that Forza titles have had before, but usually you've had to go through a menu, like a pause menu, to do it. And it was kind of an emergency recovery thing, which is what it's here for as well, in case you get in such a disaster scenario that the driving assist won't help you get out of it. And the idea here is that we want players to be able to customize their driving experience for exactly the way that they want to play. There's no one feature called one-touch driving, but if you want your touch to be steering, you can do that by turning steering to its basic level and turning on the rest of the assists. Or if you want to play your Fast and Furious game where you're just doing a lot of shifting and smashing your foot down on the accelerator, you can do that by putting on manual transmission and turning off throttle assist and turning on the other assists, etc. So finally, we come to a category of assists that I'm referencing one of my favorite podcasts here, 99% Invisible, which is all about good design. So are things that aren't really assists and they're not user configurable. They are just things that are present in the way that we designed the game to be accessible. So one of my favorite examples of this is a permanent audio cue. So we have a 3-2-1 sequence that happens at the start of every race, and the visuals are always very obvious that, okay, this is the moment you gain control of your car. But some of our early audio cues weren't quite. And so after, fixing those up a lot and in consultation with Brandon Cole, this is what we landed on. Which is a very obvious audio cue to let you know exactly when you gain control of your car. And for those of you who can see the video there, it was also presented in high contrast mode. So another cognitive accessibility feature that we have that I was particularly happy with how it landed is removing the time pressures from pitting. So the original version of pitting, or one of our early drafts, was really optimized for multiplayer, where you really had to make your choices quickly and get out of the pits. And so it had things such as on-screen timers and ticking clocks. And you had to make your choices very quickly before your car got to the pit stall so that the pitting cinematic could then play. If you didn't make the choices fast enough, the screen would just disappear and automatically go to the next one, which caused people a lot of anxiety because they're like, this is a lot of information. I haven't quite understood it all yet. And now it's gone. What's going on? And we realized that that was optimized for multiplayer, but we didn't need to do it in single player because we can pause the world. So we redesigned it to remove all those time pressure elements and just let players take their time. If they happen to make their choices, that quickly, that's great. They'll finish making their choices. The car drives to the pit, cinematic happens, you leave. If not, the world just pauses when your car gets to the pits before the cinematic. And then you finish making your choices, you make some great tactical decisions, and off you go. And then we realized we could do the same thing in multiplayer, and it actually kind of adds a bit of a skill ceiling to multiplayer pitting as well. So hopefully you've learned the scene and you know what's going on from single player. If not, maybe the first time or two in multiplayer, you take some extra time, you make your good decisions without that time pressure, and yes, your lap time will be slower on that lap. Later, once you know what you're doing, it's very quick to make your decisions and move on, and out you go. So now I'm going to hand it over to Todd to talk about blind driving assists.
Thank you, Katrin. So I'm Todd Helsley. I'm the Senior Sound Supervisor for Forza Motorsport, and I'm just going to be talking about the blind driving assists a little bit today. So it's often said that audio in video games is at least half the experience, but for blind and low vision players, the role of audio becomes even more significant as their primary source of feedback from the game. With this in mind, we set out to create the blind driving assists. The blind driving assists are a set of supplemental audio cues designed to help blind and low vision players successfully navigate tracks, improve lap times, and complete races in Forza Motorsport by providing them with as much of the same information as a sighted player. We've been developing the blind driving assists for over the last 3 years since our first prototype, which you'll see later. But it's important to note, the blind driving assists don't control the car for you in any way, and it's not a blind mode. You're playing the exact same game and making the same decisions as all players. But we did have to acknowledge, we are a circuit-based racing sim, not an open world experience. We have different challenges to solve for. Players are meant to drive as fast as possible around circuits that are sometimes leave little room for error. So we had our work cut out for us. But before jumping into the deep end with the development of the assists, we wanted to take a look at what other games were doing for blind accessibility and see if there were any themes that we could latch on to and build upon. So here's just a few of the other games that we looked at. Top Speed 3, which is actually a completely audio-driven experience, no visuals at all. Then Blind Drive, Sequence Storm, The Last of Us 2, and others. And what we found when looking at these games is most use supplemental audio sound effects for feedback and guidance. Many use the audio spatialization or panning of sounds to guide the player. And then also several of them had an expanded collection of options or configurations so that the player could tune the experience to their own needs. So with these learnings, we put together a linear concept of how we thought we might relay steering and braking to a player in Forza using a series of tones, and presented that to an early panel for feedback. And this is what that sounded like. got great feedback from this first group. One of the participants said, if the blind driving assists were in Forza 7 right now, I would fire it up and play. Basically, if the driving line, turning cues, and menu narration were there in Forza 7 at the moment, I'd be playing that instead of being here. They also doubled down on the importance of options and configurable things in the game. So that just was something that we knew we wanted to work into what we were building. And it also gave us the confidence to launch into in-game prototyping. But what we didn't want is to get to launch with a bunch of accessibility features we thought were good, but the game still wasn't accessible. We knew we needed a partner to co-develop these features with. Cue Mr. Brandon Cole. Brandon is a fully blind gamer and professional accessibility consultant and advocate who has worked on games like the Last of Us series and more recently, Mortal Kombat 1. We had heard Brandon speak previously about accessibility in games, and his level of candor and passion made him a great fit to help us co-develop the blind driving assists. So he joined the team back in March of 2021, and he's been helping co-develop these features with us ever since. The first in-game prototype we put in Brandon's hands was very similar to that concept video we just watched, where there was a repeating beeping sound as the guide for steering and for braking, and it just left Brandon spinning in circles without any clear indication of which way he should be headed. But it wasn't all bad. These initial features immediately put us on track for finding solutions to the big questions of braking and steering. Additionally, some of the sounds used in these early attempts are the same or close to what we ended up using. After several attempts at trying to worldize or make these sounds diegetic, like it was something coming from the game, like the sound of your tires or wind to tell you which direction you needed to be or the edges of the tracks, we just found it got lost or confused with the natural sounds of the race. And because of this, we intentionally reverted to the more synth-like tones so that the cues were unmistakable within the audio mix. So while the bones of the system were set up relatively quickly, we spent the next months and years with the help of Brandon expanding on and fine-tuning the blind driving assists into what they are today. So now I'm just going to go over some of the systems that make up the blind driving assists. At the heart of them, you've got the steering guide and the deceleration cues. If you've ever played Forza before, you can turn on a visual guide on the track that helps you know the optimal placement on the track while you make your way around it. And it also changes colors to let you know when you should decelerate or brake. So we were actually able to put a waypoint on that guide in front of the player, and then we can pan the engine and tire audio in the direction the player should steer. So if you hear that guide pan to the right, you steer to the right, and you try to keep the sound of your car in the middle of the stereo field. But when we presented this to a later UR panel, we found out that for some reason, or for some people, that just didn't make sense. If they heard their car pan right, it sounded like they were going off the track to the right. So they would want to steer left to get back on the track. And that totally makes sense. So we added that option in the game. So in the settings, you can actually invert that panning guide. And then just a few more things that make up BDA. You have track limit cues, which tell you your approach and how close you are to the edges of the tracks. You have wrong way cues, which just tell you if you're facing the wrong direction. If we ever need to take away control of the car, like whenever you're pulling into the pits or exiting, we play a sound that lets the player know that's happening. Additionally, if the player wants to play in manual, which isn't the default experience, but they can turn that on, we let them turn on shift cues, which tell them or lets them know the best time to shift up or down, and then sounds via our screen narrator that let them know what gear they just shifted into. So while the steering guide gives you that immediate information on which direction you need to face, we did notice there was a need to be more aware of what was coming along down the track. But luckily, we didn't have to dream anything up here. As in rally racing, they already have an established language of rally notes, where a co-pilot can, through like a series of shorthand directions, give the driver a heads up about what's coming up along the track. So we opted for a simplified version of this, where in-race dialogue calls out the direction of a turn as well as its intensity, like a left 4 or a right 6. A 6 is a less intense turn, and a 1 is a more intense turn. Additionally, you can call out hairpin turns, which are turns that basically wrap around on themselves. Or if it's a long, persistent turn, you'll hear that called out as well, like left 4 long. So these turn navigation dialogue cues do a great job of letting the player know what's coming up on the track, but they still needed a sense of what was happening during a turn. For that, we play another series of cues leading up to and throughout a turn. As a player approaches a turn here, you'll get 3 countdown cues, like a 3, 2, 1, go. That leads into the start of the turn where they'll get another cue, and then they'll get one at the middle, or the apex, and the end of a turn. And for a series of turns, they'll get another start and apex cue. And if it's at the very last turn in the series, there'll be one final cue to let them know, okay, you're done. You can just get back on the throttle and get it. So that is a lot, but let's just take a moment to listen to what all that sounds like.
Second, first, second, third, fourth, fifth,
Right 3 into right 1 long.
sixth, fifth, fourth,
So as you can see, there's a potential for a lot of different sounds to be playing on top of the soundscape the game already presents. That initial UR panel stressed the importance of user customization, and we wanted to make sure players could fully tune the blind driving assist to their personal preference, including turning off the cues they don't want or need. And we experienced that firsthand with Brandon. As he spent more time on the tracks and got familiar with them in the cars, he started to not rely on that turn navigation dialogue or the progression cues as much, and turn those off so he could focus on the steering guide and deceleration cues, which ended up resulting in faster lap times. So when the players first start Forza Motorsport, they'll be able to toggle on a default set of these BDA options. And then if they want, they can at any time go into the accessibility settings where they can adjust what's enabled, the pitch and volume of any of these cues where applicable. And then they can also hear a sound cue of a preview of what that cue sounds like. Additionally, they can play a short audio cue commentary, which is an explainer dialogue that lets the player know in context what that sound is going to sound like and how they might interact with it on track. Here's a short preview of what one of those sounds like.
Deceleration cue, 52 of 70, value selector, off, 1 of 2. On, 2 of 2.
As you approach a braking zone before a turn, you will hear these deceleration cues. When you hear that, get off the throttle and begin to apply pressure to your brakes. If you hear the alert speed up in intensity like this, that means you'll want to add even more pressure on your brakes to slow down that much more before you steer into the turn. When the deceleration cues stop playing, that's an indication that you can start applying throttle again. Every turn and every car are different, so experiment with braking and throttle control as you develop your racecraft.
So that's just a high-level look at BDA, and now we're going to pass back to Neha. Thanks.
We want to make sure that we give a shout out to the team behind the work to help make this possible. And so with that, I want to share a few of the faces from individuals working on the audio team to help bring these features to life. None of this would be possible without these individuals. In this photo, you'll see about 6 individuals of various skin tones with various color for hair and length. We have another 6 to 7 individuals also on the audio team showing some smiling faces for their experience working on this. With that, I want to summarize here at the end some key takeaways from my experience here working at Turn 10 and accessibility. For me, this was one of the first projects that I have worked on a AAA title. And so here's some best practices for what I had learned. You heard Katrin talk about this a little bit in the beginning, that accessible design is good design. With that, sometimes we think that this is common sense. However, it's really something that you have to put into practice from the very beginning, working with your designers, working with your engineers, and building it into the fundamentals of the feature. We learned this through trial and error. We heard the best practices, but it took us a little while to get in the groove of making sure that we could make this happen. Another thing is to provide accessibility education and resources throughout the duration of the project, not just at the beginning, not just your accessibility stakeholders, but to every individual in the studio. At Turn 10, we did this by providing workshops and experiences like the Inclusive Design Sprint, doing what we called accessibility mixers and brown bags, where we invited folks over their lunch or invited them over in the afternoon to hear from accessibility stakeholders and champions about their experiences and what best practices they would recommend for their own games. Also, as a producer here, I will make sure to tell everyone again to build accessibility into your project roadmap. I can't stress the importance of this. Building accessibility and making sure that we have time allocated is incredibly important. At the very beginning of development, we tried to offer folks the opportunity to do that during self-directed weeks or self-directed sprints, between big milestones. But that wasn't enough time to make sure that we could really take these ideas from inception to completion. It really helped with prototyping, but once we have dedicated time, dedicated teams, that really helps make sure that you guys can actually see these features through to the end. We also learned that it was important to invest in accessibility-focused roles for the game. At first, we wanted everybody to work on accessibility and give them free rein to do all of it. However, when it competes against other gameplay priorities, you may find yourself in situations where folks are telling you, like, we have to finish this feature or this game mode before we can focus on accessibility. Make sure that you have dedicated roles and individuals on the team. Make sure that their time isn't restricted from that area of investment. It's a great way to make sure that you have continuous support in addition to other individuals on your team working on accessibility. And also, it's important to note that we should always try to work with the community as much as we can. You've heard the saying, nothing about us without us. And that is something that we really try to embody throughout the duration of this project. We really appreciated the opportunity to work with Brandon, bring people in for our user research studies, doing our inclusive design sprints, as well as talking to people throughout this process. There are so many individuals that would love the opportunity to partner with you on your projects. So make sure to reach out and include them from the get-go. Last but not least, be open to feedback throughout development. There are key times that we start to do ideation and prototyping for the game, and later on in development, we do user research to make sure that the things that we tried to do are working the way that we intended. But there are more than just the key times in development to focus on those things. If we had the opportunity to invest even more time into our user research and get even more feedback throughout development, our game could be even better than it is today. So with that, we have some closing thoughts that we'd love for you all to hear from Brandon himself on his experience working on this project.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brandon Cole, blind accessibility consultant on Forza Motorsport. When I was invited to join this team, I was not a racing guy. And because of that, what creating BDA for Forza was it was a group of all of us learning from each other. At the same time that I was showing them how to make their game more accessible, I was learning racing terminology and learning how these cars worked and learning how these tracks worked and learning all these things. And that combination, us together, learning from each other like that, is what enabled a committed, fantastic team to make a suite of features that make Forza Motorsport the most accessible racing game of all time. I am very, very proud to have done this work and been a part of this. And to all of you, I just say, welcome to Forza.
And that is the end of today's talk. Thank you so much for giving us your time. And as we like to say here at Xbox, when everyone plays, we all win.